In 1857, Glasgow was Scotland's industrial heart, a city transformed by steam and commerce. Located on the River Clyde, it had grown from a modest cathedral town into Britain's second city, its population exploding to nearly 500,000 souls. Wealth poured in from tobacco, cotton, and shipbuilding, creating a new merchant class, eager to display their prosperity in elegant Georgian townhouses. Blytheswood Square, laid out in the 1820s, epitomized this ambition. Grand four-storied terraces surrounding manicured gardens where Glasgow's elite promenaded beneath elm trees. Yet, beneath the veneer of respectability, Victorian Glasgow operated under rigid social codes. Young women of good families lived constrained lives, chaperoned constantly, their reputations as fragile as spun glass. A single whispered scandal could destroy a family's standing forever. Marriage was not about love, but alliance, arranged between fathers over port and cigars. Romance, if it existed at all, was carefully supervised. The very idea of a young lady conducting a secret liaison, let alone a sexual relationship, was unthinkable. It would make her, in the eyes of society, no better than a common prostitute. The legal system reflected these values. Scotland's High Court of Justiciary, established in 1672, operated under Scots law, distinct from English law, with its own procedures and that peculiar verdict unique to Scotland, not proven. Neither guilty nor innocent. It meant the court believed you had done wrong, but couldn't quite prove it. Sir Walter Scott called it that bastard verdict. It satisfied no one, yet it endured. It was in this world of rigid propriety and unforgiving moral codes that Madeleine Hamilton Smith, the beautiful 19-year-old daughter of a prominent architect, would meet a penniless clerk from the Channel Islands named Pierre Emile L'Angelier. Their collision would produce the most scandalous trial in Victorian Scottish history. Madeleine Hamilton Smith was not like other girls of her station. Born in 1835 to James Smith, one of Glasgow's leading architects, and Elizabeth Hamilton, daughter of the renowned architect David Hamilton, she had every material advantage. The family resided at 7 Blythe Square, a prestigious address where servants answered every need. They summered at Row Lane, their country house in Row, near Helensburgh, overlooking the Firth of Clyde. Madeleine had been educated at an expensive boarding school in London from 1851 to 1853, returning at 18 with accomplishments expected of her class: French, drawing, piano. But Madeleine possessed qualities her parents found troubling. She was intelligent, restless, and possessed an almost compulsive need to communicate. She wrote letters constantly, 20 or more each day, to friends, relatives, anyone who would correspond. Her eyes were dark and intense. Her hair was black as polished ebony. Contemporary accounts describe her beauty as striking, almost unsettling in its intensity. She was passionate where she should have been placid, curious where she should have been content. Pierre Emile L'Angelier could not have been more different or more unsuitable. Born in Jersey, one of the Channel Islands, he had arrived in Scotland in 1851 at age 25, virtually penniless. He had worked initially as a gardener's assistant, living in conditions of desperate poverty. By 1855, he had clawed his way up to a position as a clerk in a warehouse at 10 Bothwell Street, earning 10 shillings per week, barely enough to maintain lodgings and respectability. He was 30 years old, 10 years Madeleine's senior, slight of build, and described without flattery at his inquest as unremarkable in appearance. He kept a detailed diary. He was possessive, jealous, and he saved everything. They met in March or April of 1855 on the streets of Glasgow. The exact circumstances remain unclear. Perhaps an introduction through mutual acquaintances, perhaps a chance encounter that Emile engineered. Within weeks, they corresponded. Within a month, Madeleine's parents discovered the attachment and absolutely forbade it. L'Angelier was foreign, poor, and far beneath their daughter's station. The answer was no. It would always be no. For most young women of Madeleine's class, that would have been the end of it. But Madeleine was not most young women. By mid-April 1855, L'Angelier had proposed marriage by letter. Madeleine accepted. She began to call him her husband. And because they could not meet openly, they met in secret. The arrangement they devised was audacious and risky. Madeleine's bedroom was in the basement of 7 Blytheswood Square, with a window that opened at street level. Late at night, after the household slept, L'Angelier would come to that window. Madeleine would lean out, and they would talk for hours in whispers, the iron railings between them, the fog pressing close. Sometimes he would pass letters through the bars. Sometimes she would lean far enough out to kiss him. In the summer of 1855, the Smith family decamped to Rollane as they did every year. L'Angelier followed. The country house sat amid wooded gardens that offered privacy the Glasgow streets never could. On a night in May 1856, in those gardens, beneath the trees, their relationship became sexual. Madeleine would later write to him with remarkable frankness. "If we did wrong last night, it was in the excitement of our love. I did not bleed in the least, but I had a good deal of pain during the night. Tell me, pet, were you angry at me for allowing you to do what you did?" Over 2 years, Madeleine wrote more than 250 letters to L'Angelier. She poured her heart out in page after page of passionate declarations, detailed accounts of their encounters, desperate reassurances of her love. The letters were explicit, shockingly so for a woman of her time and class. She wrote of desire, of longing, of the physical intimacy they shared. She signed them as his wife. She treasured each meeting as though they were already married. L'Angelier kept every single letter. He filed them carefully. He noted dates in his diary. He recorded their meetings, her visits, his suspicions. Because L'Angelier was not simply a lover, he was obsessed. He watched Madeleine at social events from the shadows, noting which men she danced with, whom she spoke to, how long she smiled. He wrote her letters of reproach and criticism. He accused her of flirting, of disloyalty, of insufficient devotion. And Madeleine, desperate to placate him, would write back in a frenzy of apology, begging his forgiveness, promising to do better. The pattern was clear to anyone reading those letters decades later. This was not a love affair between equals. It was possession. L'Angelier used Madeleine's letters as leverage, her passion as chain. He knew that if those letters ever became public, she would be ruined. No respectable family would receive her. No man would marry her. She would be cast out, perhaps forced into prostitution or the workhouse. Victorian society offered no second chances for fallen women. And as 1856 turned to 1857, Madeleine's feelings began to change. Perhaps she matured, perhaps the secrecy and fear exhausted her, perhaps she simply realized that L'Angelier would never let her go, that marriage to him meant a lifetime of jealousy and control. Whatever the reason, she wanted out. Over 2 years, Madeleine wrote more than 250 letters to L'Angelier. She poured her heart out in page after page of passionate declarations, detailed accounts of their encounters, desperate reassurances of her love. The letters were explicit, shockingly so for a woman of her time and class. She wrote of desire, of longing, of the physical intimacy they shared. She signed them as his wife. She treasured each meeting as though they were already married. L'Angelier kept every single letter. He filed them carefully. He noted dates in his diary. He recorded their meetings, her visits, his suspicions. Because L'Angelier was not simply a lover, he was obsessed. He watched Madeleine at social events from the shadows, noting which men she danced with, whom she spoke to, how long she smiled. He wrote her letters of reproach and criticism. He accused her of flirting, of disloyalty, of insufficient devotion. And Madeleine, desperate to placate him, would write back in a frenzy of apology, begging his forgiveness, promising to do better. The pattern was clear to anyone reading those letters decades later. This was not a love affair between equals. It was possession. L'Angelier used Madeleine's letters as leverage, her passion as a chain. He knew that if those letters ever became public, she would be ruined. No respectable family would receive her. No man would marry her. She would be cast out, perhaps forced into prostitution or the workhouse. Victorian society offered no second chances for fallen women. And as 1856 turned to 1857, Madeleine's feelings began to change. Perhaps she matured, perhaps the secrecy and fear exhausted her, perhaps she simply realized that L'Angelier would never let her go, that marriage to him meant a lifetime of jealousy and control. Whatever the reason, she wanted out. In January 1857, William Harper Minnick began courting Madeleine openly. He was everything L'Angelier was not: prosperous, respectable, approved by her parents. A merchant with an established business, Minnick was a neighbor in Blytheswood Square, from the right sort of family. On the 28th of January 1857, he proposed marriage. Madeleine accepted. She wrote to L'Angelier in early February, attempting to end their relationship. The letter dated the 15th of February was blunt. "You may be astonished at the sudden change, but for some time back you must have noticed a coolness in my notes. My love for you has ceased, and that is why I was cool. I did at one time love you truly, fondly, but for some time back you must have noticed a change. I wish to take advantage of that change, to be once more my former self, long before I ever knew you." She asked for her letters back, all of them, every dangerous, explicit page. She needed them destroyed before she married Minnick, before anyone could ever read them. L'Angelier's response was absolute refusal. Not only would he not return the letters, he would use them. He wrote to Madeleine, making his intentions crystal clear. He would show the letters to her father. He would show them to William Minnick. He would destroy her reputation and her engagement. And he made a threat that chilled her. "You shall not marry another man whilst I live." It was blackmail, pure and simple.
L'Angelier knew exactly what power he held. Those letters were a loaded pistol pointed at Madeleine's future. She could not marry whilst he possessed them. She could not be free whilst he lived. The obsession that had driven him to save every word now became a weapon. He would rather see her ruined than see her happy with another man.
At approximately 2 o'clock in the morning, Pierre Emile L'Angelier died in his room at Franklin Place. He had made it back to his lodgings, but only just. The landlady heard him groaning, thrashing in agony. By the time anyone reached him, convulsions racked his body. His back arched violently. Foam gathered at his mouth. He remained conscious almost to the end, aware of what was happening, powerless to stop it. Dr. Hugh Thompson conducted the post-mortem examination. What he found shocked him. L'Angelier's stomach contained at least half an ounce, more than 14 grams, of arsenic, even after a night of violent purging. The amount was staggering. Dr. Thompson had never seen anything like it in a murder case, only in suicides. It was enough to kill 3 men. The poisoning was not subtle or gradual. It was massive, overwhelming, absolute. The police investigation moved swiftly. They found L'Angelier's diary, documenting his relationship with Madeleine and his mysterious illnesses. They found his correspondence file, and there, carefully preserved, they found more than 250 letters from Madeleine Hamilton Smith. Letters that detailed a secret engagement, clandestine meetings, sexual intimacy. Letters that proved motive beyond any doubt. Chemists were interviewed. Poison registers were examined. 3 separate purchases of arsenic were traced to Madeleine Smith. She had signed her real name each time. On the 31st of March 1857, Madeleine Hamilton Smith was arrested on suspicion of willful murder. The news exploded across Scotland. The daughter of one of Glasgow's most prominent families, accused of poisoning her secret lover with arsenic. When the contents of the letters began to leak, hints of their explicit nature, whispers of what they contained, the scandal became a sensation. This was not just murder. This was a respectable young lady who had written openly about sex, desire, and passion. Victorian society was transfixed with horror.
The trial of Madeleine Hamilton Smith began on the 30th of June 1857 at the High Court of Justiciary in Edinburgh. The case had generated such feverish interest that it was moved from Glasgow to avoid prejudice. Every morning, thousands gathered outside the courthouse. When the doors opened at 8 o'clock, the public gallery filled within minutes. Those who secured seats considered themselves fortunate. This was the trial of the century. Presiding was Lord Justice Clerk Hope. Leading the prosecution was the Lord Advocate James Moncrieff. Defending Madeleine was John Inglis, one of Scotland's finest advocates, who would later become Lord Justice General. The defence cost her family £10,000, a fortune in 1857, equivalent to over £1 million today. James Smith, Madeleine's father, had mortgaged everything to save his daughter. 189 witnesses were called over 9 days. Medical experts testified about arsenic poisoning. Chemists confirmed the purchases. Friends and servants described Madeleine's behavior.
But the centerpiece of the trial, the moment everyone waited for, came on the 4th of July, the 5th day of proceedings. An elderly clerk stood before the packed courtroom and began to read aloud from Madeleine's letters. For an entire day he read in a dry, monotonous voice, whilst the courtroom listened in stunned silence. The contrast was extraordinary. His dull tone delivering words of feverish passion, explicit desire, desperate love. "My husband, my darling Emile, I long to be with you. Our meetings are the only happiness I know. If what we did was wrong, it was in the excitement of our love." Women in the gallery covered their faces. Men stared in fascination. The respectable young woman sitting calmly in the dock had written these words, words no lady should even know, let alone commit to paper. The scandal was complete.
John Inglis built Madeleine's defense on doubt. He acknowledged the affair, the letters, there was no denying them. But murder? The evidence was circumstantial. Yes, Madeleine had purchased arsenic, but she claims she used it cosmetically, a common practice. 2 chemists testified they had colored the arsenic as required by law, adding indigo. Yet Dr. Thompson's post-mortem found no trace of coloring in L'Angelier's stomach. How could that be? L'Angelier's own valet, Auguste Demine, testified that his master had been despondent, had spoken of suicide. L'Angelier was known to use arsenic himself, claiming it helped his digestion. The massive dose in his stomach, half an ounce even after vomiting, was unprecedented in murder cases. Only suicides consumed such quantities. And crucially, no witness placed Madeleine and L'Angelier together in the final 3 weeks of his life. No one saw him at her window on that fatal Saturday night. The chronology of letters was confused. The police had mixed envelopes during the search, and many letters bore no dates. The timeline was murky. Inglis posed an alternative. What if L'Angelier, facing rejection, consumed the arsenic himself? What if his final act was designed to ensure Madeleine would be accused? A man who saved every letter, who threatened, "You shall not marry another whilst I live," might he not orchestrate his own death to destroy her? The jury, 15 men, deliberated for 30 minutes. When they returned, the foreman read 3 verdicts. Not guilty on the first charge, not proven on the second and third charges of murder. Madeleine showed no emotion. She stood motionless in the dock, her face composed. Not proven meant she was free, but it also meant the jury believed she had probably done it. Scotland's bastard verdict satisfied no one, least of all Madeleine, who later wrote, "I am not at all pleased with the verdict."
Madeleine Hamilton Smith walked free from the High Court on the 9th of July, 1857. She escaped the courthouse in disguise, wearing a green veil, her clothing changed to avoid recognition. William Minnock immediately broke their engagement. Glasgow society shunned her. Her father, James Smith, broken by the scandal, died 6 years later at age 55. The family never recovered. But Madeleine did. On the 4th of July, 1861, she married George Wardle, an artist associated with William Morris's circle. She had 2 children, Mary and Thomas. She lived quietly in London, moving in socialist and literary circles, knowing George Bernard Shaw. In 1889, after 28 years of marriage, she and Wardle separated. She emigrated to America. In 1916, at age 75, she married again, William Sheehy, a man 26 years her junior. When Sheehy died In 1926, Madeleine was left alone. She died in New York on the 12th of April, 1928, at age 93. She is buried in Mount Hope Cemetery, Hastings-on-Hudson. Pierre Emile L'Angelier lies in Ramshorn Graveyard, Glasgow, in plot J32. His grave is still there, still visited, still marked. He was 34 years old when he died. Madeleine lived 69 years after his death, more than twice his entire lifespan. The question remains unanswered. Did Madeleine poison L'Angelier with calculated coldness to escape his blackmail? Or did a possessive, rejected man consume a fatal dose of arsenic, knowing the evidence would point directly at her, his final act of control, his vengeance from beyond the grave? The massive quantity of poison, the lack of witnesses, the confused chronology, the threats he made, all suggest the possibility was real. Perhaps the most unsettling truth is this: we will never know. Not proven, neither guilty nor innocent, forever suspended between two possibilities. The fog never lifted. The verdict stands. The mystery endures.